Deathpixie disclaimer. This video was originally recorded in September 2024. There is swearing and profanity. Sources are listed in the description. This video is not monetized. Any ads you see provide revenue to the hosting site, not the creators. If you made it this far, geez, you have a lot of patience.
Deathpixie dancing on the lip of madness!
Welcome to Shitty PowerPoint Theater. Dignity not included.
Hello, everybody. We are back. Look at this wonderful peppy screen. We totally didn't just record and have to undo.
Of course not. We are professionals like that.
We're totally
something like that would never happen. By the way, CBC Radio, if you want us to do an in-depth analysis of all the prime ministers, all the political appointees, all of the children, we're even willing to do some of the grandchildren in those cases. Maybe not Justin's, because they don't exist. But we're looking to just give us money. And look at the slide. We've got a lovely pencil that's doing things that pencils shouldn't do. We've got fireworks, some of which are coming up from the pencil. And we've got this beautiful slide deck here. And I'm just noticing this now. What's with all the facts?
All the parts. There are so many parts to the Prime Minister. So if you thought we were detailed before, oh my goodness, we're about to dive into the Prime Ministers that covered the last 30, 40 years of Canadian politics. So it's going to get in depth because that all directly affects today. Everything affects today, but really we're talking about that. I also had to make a correction because I don't think we spoke about it enough. So Brian Mulroney, when I was highlighting that he had a deficit almost 100% of the GDP, the reason why we were highlighting that is because there was kind of no reason for that deficit to be like that. There was no sort of silent recession going on like you saw with Pierre-Elliott Trudeau. There was no, times of war, no depression, no global pandemic where because let's be fair to Justintrudeau, I believe he would have broken even had it not been for COVID and, trying to keep people from dying.
He had a plan. He had a plan to break even. And I actually think, because it's interesting to me how conservatives have been brought on as quote-unquote fiscally conservative. Up until, I believe, Joe. I think Joe was the last one to do this. If you take a look at the conservatives' budgets and most of the liberals' budgets, quite frankly, they're around even. Some ran a bit of a surplus, some ran a bit of a deficit, but generally around even. You could trust these guys. Mulroney comes in and boom.
Yeah.
And we haven't really seen from liberal or conservative any sort of real return to running somewhat of a balanced budget. Although, it's interesting, if you look at the last 5 budgets, I believe, outside of Justintrudeau, I believe all of them were conservative budgets that were completely overblown.
Yeah, and it's the reason why we want to highlight that is, so Brian Mulroney, 80s. Margaret Thatcher, 80s. Ronald Reagan, 80s. Trickle-down economics started there. And it's really, there was no sort of social program spending, no global issue that would have justified that kind of a deficit. And it really marks a turn where it's you need to start thinking, are you looking at conservatives from a legacy perspective, or are you looking at conservatives from a what have they done perspective? And that's why we wanted to highlight it as being important, because it also ties into globally what was going on at the time and the issues that we have now from trickle-down economics and how it doesn't work.
And to be fair, not to say that the same isn't true for some of the Liberal prime ministers. Pierre Elliott Trudeau's legacy hires, for example. We know that it happens across every level of government. There is some form of legacy hires or appointees, but nothing on the scale of Pierre Elliott when he left office.
Which was why we called it an FU move. But also, it's easier to kind of overall understand a budget than it is for me to say, go through all 200 of those people's CVs and track records, and then look at where they were put in, and then look at their track record there, and then say, did it make sense or not? But then also, I'd have to go and compare that to other legacy hires around the same period by different prime ministers.
Yeah.
So that's difficult to do a full analysis on.
But you do it, right?
I mean, if I was hired to do it, sure. CBC Radio, we would totally go way in depth on shit. We totally would.
It would.
CBC Radio.
It wouldn't take much.
Look, we don't want to undercut anybody. We would never undercut anybody. Absolutely not. But, I mean, you gonna hire us? Because we'll totally do that. Yeah. So, in this day and age, we all need money. It's a fact. So, Anyway, we're about to get into one of the most amusing prime ministers. A prime minister who really... It was when they came in, it was the beginning of an era, and I do not use that word lightly. It was an era.
So basically, before Justintrudeau, who is an era in of himself, we had two Liberal prime ministers. One of them very serious, one of them very funky. Guess which one lasted longer?
Oh. It was our lovely Jean Chrétien, the observant.
Say what you want. The man was an enigma.
He was. Also, what happened?
What?
I did a lovely animation just for you on this slide.
Did you misclick? Up there's the pie.
With a handshake. Handshake of friendship. Total friendship. We'll get to that.
Oh, man.
So I do want to point out, look at how long. This is why we say this is an era. Look at how long. That is 20 years of longevity there.
How is that 20 years of longevity?
Oh, sorry.
Did you miscount?
I completely miscounted.
You did this in the other recording too.
I did it too. It's 10 years. 10-year era that we had here. His wife did unfortunately die in 2020. He's still kicking. 3 children, and like I said, we're kind of only noting the kids that are very easy to find the names of. We don't want to go out of our way to be like, hey, let's publicize this kid who has nothing to do in the public eye.
Sorry, and our condolences again to Creed, Brat, and Chrétien, and Blanket Chrétien for not being mentioned in this. Quite frankly, we could not be bothered to publicize your names and information.
Yeah. Now, some things I do want to note about Jean Chrétien. So, very entertaining. However, he is somebody who worked up in government and knew all the ins and outs of how government works. And that's not just elected level, that was day-to-day level. So a lot of the efficiencies of his administration came from the fact that there was this knowledge.
He knew what he was doing.
Yeah. They absolutely knew what they were doing. Jean Chrétien did also work under Pierre Elliott Trudeau. He, in fact, remember how we said there was kind of one major concession made on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, being that notwithstanding clause? Yeah. He was the one who kind of said to Pierre Elliott Trudeau, what's more important to you, getting this through or arguing this point, knowing that several of the provinces are going to pull out instantly if you argue? And so it was about picking your battles. I think it was a prime example of that. That being said, they weren't close friends. They did respect each other as colleagues, but they weren't close friends. So I do want to let that know. I also highlight that because I find a lot of people forget that you don't have to be best friends with someone to work well with them.
Yeah.
You can actually hate somebody and still work well with them. So it's...
Yeah, it's like how you hate me and lock me in basements and curse me.
I feed you fish heads, you're fine.
Yeah, but Eli always gets the ones that are like, his fluttering mane just keeps on going bigger and bigger and longer. I get, the ones that have expired. It's funny. Yet I'm the one who's dragged out for this.
But here, let's take a look at the track record.
Yeah.
So, this is a lot. A lot happened. So, we've got the Clarity Act, the Youth Criminal Justice Act. So the Clarity Act was to avoid ambiguity in future referendum questions. Specifically, if Quebec wanted to leave Canada, it was clearly setting out how a province can leave and could leave. Though a threshold for majority wasn't spelled out, it was spelled out what would happen, because there was a lot of ambiguity around that. If the Youth Criminal Justice Act, focusing on export and trade agreements outside of the U.S., it's always good to have multiple export trade agreements with multiple countries.
And keep in mind, a lot of that expansion was in the later Chrétien years.
Yes.
And to the point where one of Chrétien's, the conservative pundits will use against Chrétien is, Chrétien was not in favor of the war in Iraq,
which I actually find is a positive.
And no, it's definitely a positive, because we know what the war of Iraq led to. It was just trying to find oil.
Yeah.
Let's call a spade here. But most conservative pundits will take that as, not being supportive of your number one trade partner. Chrétien put things in place to ensure that if that relationship were to deteriorate, that Canada's economic futures aren't totally bleak without the United States. That is huge.
Yeah.
For
and
Canadian
also,
politics.
Yeah, and it's also keeping with that idea that was set out after the formation of the United Nations, that Canada typically tries not to get involved unless it's a UN-sanctioned war.
Yep. Like the war in Afghanistan was, because that was a tragedy.
Yeah. Sexual orientation was added to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which was pretty cool. Now, there were a lot of economic achievements. Now, this was due to the next Prime Minister, Paul Martin.
Who was finance minister under Chrétien.
Now, Paul Martin, the major thing about him is maybe not the best prime minister, but everybody, even the opposition, loved him as a finance minister.
Yeah.
So that his true strength was there. So they had a $42 billion deficit was eliminated. 5 consecutive budget surpluses were recorded. $36 billion in debt was paid down. Taxes were cut by $100 billion cumulatively. There we go, over 5 years. And there was actually a balanced budget was presented in 98. And those are pretty big things to happen. Now, not to say that there weren't cuts made.
No, there totally were.
Yeah, there were cuts.
You can't have a debt reduction on the $1 billion level without there being cuts.
Oh yeah, and it's like healthcare was really running on a shoestring and stuff like that. And we fully acknowledge that. But I also want to acknowledge one thing. It was a Liberal government that did that, not
Yes.
conservative. So who's fiscally
Yes, it was.
conservative now? Who's
Yeah.
fiscally conservative now? That's why I wanted to highlight that. Jean,
I can't believe that they didn't get the fiscally conservative label. I can't believe they didn't get that. And
for doing
that's...
this, right?
Yeah.
Like, for
Yeah.
doing that? Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, I'm not going to speak ill of finance ministers. I don't know them all that well across either party.
You
except
don't know
Paul...
them personally?
Yeah.
I don't.
I've been locked in a basement for so long. Like I stink. But Paul Martin, it takes a lot for a finance minister who is one of the more important ministers in government makeup. It's huge to be respected across both parties.
Yeah.
And any fringe party like the New Democratic Party, Green Party, even like Paul Martin, for all I know. You don't understand how good something like that is to have around. Paul Martin is the reason that we knew in school at the age of like 7 what a finance minister was.
Yeah. It's
so
it's a pretty big deal, and we want to give like credit to where credit's due. But one thing I will say though is they did have a program review committee that did decide where the government was going to cut money. So I did want to note that. And then looking back on in particular the 95 budget, Chrétien did have this to say in 2011. There would have been a day when we would have been the Greece of today. I knew we were in a bind, and I knew we had to do something. So it was deep cuts. It absolutely was deep cuts. However, it was deep cuts as the result of who was it again who made that deficit almost 100% of the GDP? I don't remember.
Obviously, it was that evil child Blanket Chrétien.
Oh yeah.
That's definitely it. No conservative like Brian Mulroney would ever make a huge deficit. Honestly, if you take a look at the conservative budget, there's absolutely no way that a sore thumb would just stick out.
No. So
never.
We want to note that a few cool things that happened. So Jean Augustine was the first Black woman elected to House of Commons. Adrienne Clarkson was the first person of color to be appointed Governor General. So pretty cool. There was a Human Rights Commission done, and it was recommending a pay equity system, which
is groundbreaking.
Yeah, like awesome.
It's kind of huge.
Opposed. We already spoke about this, but opposing the participation in the Iraq War.
Yeah.
We did have C-46 was passed. So it was limiting when a complainant may be required to produce personal counseling records. So this was following an outcry from women's groups when 2 Indigenous women were accused their former residential school principal of sexual assault, and he wanted their counseling records for his defense. And so that's what that was meant to do. And he helped create those records. Yeah. So are we seeing a conflict of interest here?
Yeah.
So it's that was a big thing to happen. National Child Benefit Program.
Huge.
There was aid for Vancouver to win the 2010 Winter Olympics bid, which, that's a big worldwide thing. Whether you think of it as I personally think that the Olympics should be run on some sort of international type country where the UN is stationed and all of that stuff. But that's just how the Olympics.
I'm actually surprised you put sports ball in as a positive.
I put it as a positive because a lot of people viewed it as a positive.
But there's sports ball. In the Winter Olympics, there's frozen sports ball. Does Miri support sports ball?
I don't know. Does Miri? Well, here's the thing. When I root for sports, I root for the sports ball. So.
Okay. All right. So, in 2024, when we have summer sports ball, which is not that far away. Which sports ball are you rooting for most?
No,
So
just
we've got
all
so many sports balls.
all the sports ball. Go
all
ball.
The sports ball.
So here's the thing: when you bet on the sports ball, you never lose.
Yeah, but when you bet on the sports ball, you never win. And what if the sports ball is deflated? Or worse yet, damaged?
Wait, is it deflated physically or mentally?
In some cases, depending on the football, or depending on the sports ball, it is physically deflated. In some cases, it is just emotionally deflated, and it will not go into a hoop or a net or into somebody's hands. Like it's one of those things.
Well, see, obviously we need to talk about the mental health of the sports ball more.
Yes, we do.
We clearly do. Anyway, that happened. This is one of my favorites, was Conrad Black versus Chrétien. So he was prevented from getting a title from the Queen under the Nickel Resolution. So he was an Anglo-Canadian media magnate, and he was supposed to receive British peerage. But 2 days before he was to receive a title, Chrétien advised the Queen not to, because 1917 was the Nickel Resolution, where the House of Commons asked King George V not to grant any titles of nobility or knighthoods to Canadians. And I freaking love that he trolled Conrad Black so hard. I love that he waited till 2 days before to do it. Conrad Black was an asshole. I think we could all agree about that. And it was hilarious. And Conrad Black ultimately wanted that title so much he gave up Canadian citizenship to get it. So but see, like I said, entertaining Prime Minister.
he is easily one of the most.
There was a bill introduced to the House of Commons that would have legalized gay marriage at that time. I believe it got pushed through under Paul Martin. And it was after a Toronto court ruling. So the court ruling, so what happened was, in case anybody wants to know about, Pride history in Canada, you could get married if it was recognized when you go to sign your license, or you were recognized by a religious institution. So 2 gay men went to an Anglican church in Toronto, which the guy was like, yeah, sure, I'll marry you. And so based on that, legally, yes, they were married. So there was a court ruling saying, yes, the gay marriage is allowed because the specifications were met. So that was legalizing it throughout the country, was what was trying to be done there. But yeah, and that is why at the big Pride Parade in Toronto, there is an event that happens at the same Anglican church where that took place. Because I find a lot of people forget why religious institutions can be involved, and that's why that one is involved, because they basically presided over the first legal gay marriage in the country. HST started... that I view it as a positive because you're harmonizing all the taxes together. Personally, a bigger positive to me would be if the ticket price included taxes on things. That's what I want. I want that. It's really easy to budget when you have it that way. Establishing the long gun registry. So that was the Canadian Firearms Registry, which I gotta say, it's always a good thing. You get licensed for a car. Get licensed for a car. So
yep. Now Miri loves sports ball so much. It was put on here twice. The 2010 Winter Olympics out of Vancouver. Again, a great job for sports ball enthusiast Miri, who clearly loves sports ball way too much. And he also updated the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, National Marine Conservation Areas Act, the Pest Control Products Act, the Species at Risk Act. Now, the Pest Control Products Act, I just want to say, for the benefit of my family, my father did not like that Chrétien did this, because so many damn pests keep eating his damn lawn. But that
wait, is your dad going out on his lawn going, Curse you, meddling pest! Get off my lawn!
Well, okay. Technically, there's a lot more swearing than that. But that's the same message, and he cursed Jean Chrétien every time he does it. But yet, that still did not stop him from voting for Chrétien.
What I also wanted to note was...
Is it about sports ball? Because you've already done this twice.
No, the Iraq War, just because you mentioned it.
Yeah.
At the time, 85% of Canadian trade was with the U.S., so it's a very big thing. We did send 2,000 troops in 2003 to Afghanistan, but I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, that was sanctioned by the UN. So
those were sanctioned by the UN. Anything with the Afghanistan was sanctioned in the UN.
Yeah.
The thing is, the US pulled out numbers to go to this war in Iraq. Canadians were stepped in as peacekeepers. That was sanctioned by the UN.
Yeah. So going over to Con, there was some Plan B controversy policy scandal with the Clarity Act that happened.
Yeah.
And apparently I didn't bother to note it. I just said that's what it was.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to give some details on that.
So I don't know the exact details, but I can definitely do a quick search, see if I can't make head or tail of this. I know somewhat about the Plan B policy, but give me some time, I might be able to provide some clarity.
I want to note one thing. See. So there was one that spanned both of these. So in theory, there were amendments. So there were amendments to the Elections Act, which concerned party funding and reducing the influence of individuals and organizations. And in theory, that was meant to succeed. In practice, it was discovered it did not work. So, it's one of those you can take it or leave it things. I do think that it was in response to the sponsorship scandal, which basically involves $100 million distributed from the Prime Minister's office to Quebec Federalist and Liberal Party interests without much accountability. It was found by the Auditor General, but it's essentially there's some money that was involved there, a couple $1 million that got lost and could not be accounted for by the Auditor General. So what was it? There's a quote about it. Perhaps there was a few $1 million that might have been stolen in the process. It is possible. But how many millions of dollars have we saved the country because we have reestablished the stability of Canada as a united country? If somebody has stolen the money, they will face the courts. But I will not apologize to Canadians. One guess as to who said that. Our favorite entertainer.
Yep.
So it's one of those things where the sponsorship scandal. So that's what happened there.
Yeah.
This is one of those interests where Chrétien was unable to get Clinton to agree to ratify NAFTA. Did get a letter stating that the US had no interest in Canada's water because NAFTA at that point in time could have been exploited for getting Canada's, I should specifically say drinking water. So it was more of a good faith letter, but again, that doesn't necessarily hold any US administration up to not doing that. So just a note there. This is one of the more entertaining things that is viewed, objectively speaking, yes, it is a con, but goddamn is it funny. So November 1997, all right, setting the stage. The Asia Pacific Economic Corporation Summit was being held. We're at the University of British Columbia. They're at the campus, and there was a protest that happened. And RCMP were viewed as improperly pressured to attack protesters. Pepper spray was used. And Chrétien Chrétien, we have the direct quote later on, but Chrétien was asked about this, and he was like, what is this pepper spray? I put it on my food. It's just like completely sidestepping, like, the questions of what force is reasonable, what force isn't reasonable, why are we using the RCMP to do this against Canadians?
It was incompetent that it actually came off as being strangely competent.
Yeah, it was so funny.
Like, if you're gonna dodge a question, that is how you dodge.
Yeah, like, I'm just like, yes, it's a con because he's downplaying stuff, but oh my god, is it funny? Like, I feel bad for laughing, but it's funny, guys, and I'm sorry here. We mentioned with the budget there were fewer government services, and most notably the cuts to the healthcare sector, but also to women's rights groups, minority groups, Indigenous rights groups, while corporations saw continued tax breaks that started in the Mulroney years. Now, I will say, once tax rates have been made to corporations, it is incredibly difficult to get even people on your own party to agree to introducing them again. So I will say, as you noted with Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who wouldn't have run a deficit had he been allowed to introduce the corporate taxes that he wanted to. So there is quite a balance there. Not to say that anything came without cuts, but again, an example, if you want to start talking to me about fiscally conservative, this was a Liberal government that did this, which is more fiscally conservative than we could say for a lot of the conservative leading parties. So there you go. There was fallout from the Airbus affair, and that was from the Mulroney government. But here, the controversy where Chrétien was involved with is with both the Airbus affair and the Somalia affair. Chrétien did stop the investigations. And now I'm going to touch on Justintrudeau, who he's never actually stopped an investigation on himself that I'm aware of. And he's accepted responsibility and accepted results from those investigations. So just is interesting to see that kind of change over time in how governments deal with that. And we'll consider looking at that. So yes, Canada was involved in the war in Afghanistan. There was a prisoner of war handover issue towards the US, mainly because it came out about Guantanamo Bay, and should Canada really be handing over POWs knowing that sort of thing is going on. Neither of us are familiar with jurisdictional requirements when the United Nations and multiple countries' armies are involved. So I can't speak to it, but it has been viewed as an overall con. Yeah, the Asia Pacific Economic Corporation, I mentioned that before. That's with the pepper spray. They tend to be talked about separately, but they really are a together type thing. We have the Lawrence McAulay conflict of interest issue. Conflict of interest, I think that's self-explanatory there. The health minister, Alan Rock, was successful in limiting the number of Canadians stricken with hepatitis C through negligence who would collect compensation. That's not a good move, man. It's really not a good move. Nobody wants hep C from negligence. That's not cool. And then we have the Grand Mare affair, or the Shawinigan scandal. And that had to do with funding of the Grand Mare. I think it was a golf course or a hotel. I can't remember. But it had to do with the... oh, here we go. It was how a loan was given, or whether or not Chrétien actually sold his shares in a hotel. He was cleared of wrongdoing by the ethics board, but was owed money for his sale of the shares in the hotel. So it was sort of, again, one of those timing things. Same with the sponsorship scandals. It had to do with the timing things. I will note that Chrétien may have had somebody outside of the government who was a bit of an enforcer. So, There we go. Now, I assume I've given you enough time to look into the Clarity Act and the Plan B policy scandal.
The Plan B policy scandal. The Plan B policy scandal is all around contraception. And that's probably why you had it at a full stop. It's all around contraception, so Plan B policy scandal effectively limited pharmaceutical companies and how they could use pharmacists to advise women on whether or not to take Plan B, what is the way to go about doing it. Overall, and effectively limited pharmacists' power in advising in certain situations with regards to Plan B and how to effectively use it safely and effectively.
Yeah, and here's the thing: you've got to let medical personnel advise.
Yeah,
it's whether or not you agree with how medication is used, you need to allow people to advise others on how to take that medication.
Yeah.
Now I have some context. So is there anything you want to touch on here before I put in my context notes?
Chrétien is a very charismatic leader.
Yeah.
He's a very fun leader to have, and as you're growing up knowing that this is your prime minister, one who had the pomp, had the circumstance, and had the know-how to get things done, it was a great introduction to Canadian politics to have this guy as your go-to. Again,
could you imagine the memes if memes were a thing? Could you imagine the memes?
Oh my God, yes! Him and meme culture, I gotta tell you, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. Had memes been a thing, it would have been quite interesting.
Yeah.
So there is some context. So Chrétien had actually, I mentioned this before, had served in but here's more details. Served in every Liberal cabinet since 1965. So he had all of this knowledge about a parliamentary system, and he actually established a very centralized and efficient government. The criticism flip side of that was the fact that it kind of became a bit of an inner circle, and people like Jeffrey Simpson would say that it was a friendly dictatorship that was intolerant of internal dissent. So there is a flip side to that, but you can't deny the efficiency that you get from that, and the fact that you don't need as many people to do as many things, which also helps if you're trying to get rid of a deficit. So there's pros and cons to that.
Now a lot of that is what allowed for there to be dissension amongst the Liberal Party between the Chrétien loyalists and the Martin loyalists in the early 2000s, because, as we noted before, you don't have to be friends with someone to work well with them. Chrétien and Martin worked very, very well. However, the personal Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien could not stand each other, especially within the later years. Mm-hmm. Martin had his group of loyalists, and why not? He's one of the most respected finance ministers ever. There was some disputes that were unresolvable within the Chrétien and Martin years, to where Martin would send memorandums to Chrétien advising him to step down if he wanted to leave with any sort of grace and dignity. And 2003, we finally saw that, and Martin moved into leadership for what turned out to be the final Chrétien Liberal term. And it fractured the Liberal Party something fierce.
Yeah, it did. Just a side note, government terminology moved from community to stakeholders. We see that even today in healthcare. There are hospitals that try to get, healthcare staff to say clients instead of patients, and things like that. So it's not really a responsibility of the Chrétien government to establish terminology, but it is just context for the time period about what was starting to happen. There were the quote-unquote Team Canada trade missions, and Chrétien did that to improve Sino-Canadian economic relations. The flip side of that was, in order to improve those relations, you kind of have to ignore the subject of human rights. And here's the thing. I will touch on this because we're seeing it today. So China, for example, does not accept criticism, and they're in fact annoyed and offended by it, because to them it's, how dare you come here and tell me how to run my country? How dare you come here and impose your culture upon us? That's how it's viewed. That's why you end up with leaders, visiting countries that don't have the same types of human rights that their home countries do, but not saying anything, because that's not their place to do that. That's how wars are started. That's how disagreements are started. The other thing I will say is, go and have a look at most of the products you have in your house and how much of that is made in China, or how much goes through a plant in China. And now imagine if there is a sanction on China that doesn't allow any products made in China to come to Canada. Most people are going to get mad about that. So that's the other thing, is you can't suddenly stop this, because most people, they're going to be mad that they can't get all of their clothes. They're going to be mad that they can't get all of their products. They're going to be mad about having to pay more money for certain things. And so that's something that you do need to realize when we're talking about these kind of economic trade missions. How can you ignore the subject of human rights? Well, part of it is disrespectful to go into another country and tell them what to do, even if it's for the greater good. And the other side of it is, the people of the home country like their stuff. Like, I don't think you would disagree with me on that, would you?
Yeah, no.
People like their stuff. There you go. The last residential school that was operated by the Canadian government was closed in 96. 96 also saw the last hall in the last residential school was closed. 97, the final residential school in Saskatchewan was closed. Saskatchewan was actually where the last residential school operated by the Canadian government was. I spoke about a lot of this. September 11th, 2001. So we did provide recovery support to the event. I remember, I think my mom was a nurse. She's a retired nurse now. Her hospital was on lockdown. They were not allowed to leave until they knew if they were getting patients from New York City.
Yep.
There's what was it? I think the musical has Come From Away, about like a Newfoundland town opening up their doors to, Americans who had to land there because they couldn't land in New York City due to what was going on with these September 11th attacks. What was it?
It was
there was
a monumental time.
Yeah, it was a pretty big time. I remember I was in middle school and we got the announcement. So I was grade 7 or grade 8. I can't remember which. I can do the math and figure it out, but it's grade 7, grade 8. And I remember getting into a stairwell and I heard the door of the floor above me bust open and this kid screamed, "We're going to war!" And then I'm getting home and my mom's calling me from the hospital explaining to me that she doesn't know when she can come home. And we've got to just sit tight and wait and see what happens. And like, you don't know what's going on. And I think it's no lie, I grew up in Toronto, so you're right across the lake from like where a lot of stuff's going down, and you don't know what's going to happen. There were concerns that there would be attacks on the CN Tower, for example. Interesting fact, didn't know this. The CN Tower is in fact that if it was crashed into, it's rigged to fall into the lake.
Yep.
So I was like, oh, great on you, engineers. That was good planning. Good for you. So yeah, it was big times. I'm sure it was big times for you as well.
Well, actually, so I did not grow up in Toronto. I grew up in
the salt mines.
I grew up in the salt mines. And I grew up in a spot where it was obviously 30 to 32 degrees Fahrenheit or colder. Now, I'm noting that for our American viewers. However, I went to penguin school that day, and it was a good day. Fish was had, and then I waddle home to my, well, I don't even know, snow mound, igloo. It's very interesting, and my mother says, Crabsworth, something is happening with the humans. Of course, she did it in penguin, so it was like, and so naturally, we penguins started to attempt to communicate and try to figure things out. Somehow, some way, and don't ask me how, we got a simulcast of Live with Regis and Kathy Lee. I don't know how we got it. That stopped at about 9:15 a.m. Because that's when the first attack ended up happening. And we were watching as I think it was the Pentagon the one that got hit first, or was it one of the Twin Towers? I don't know. Anyway, we watched in horror as thousands of Americans were up in the air. And, us penguins, much like you in Toronto, were very concerned. If they can hit New York, what does that mean for Toronto? What does that mean for the salt mines? What does that mean for us? What does that mean for us and our little snow mounds, our little igloos? There was a lot of panic, but it was not announced to us within the school system. Nobody knew anything. Our teacher didn't know anything, of course, but then again, she was also a penguin because of where I grew up. And unfortunately, you go around and you try to talk to people. You see a lot of news, a lot of media outlets. By Friday, our teacher had actually had enough to process and let us know what was going on, just in case our parents did not know. But at the time of the attacks, it was just a regular day, much like it was for U.S. President George W. Bush, who was visiting a small children's school at the time, apparently, and reading My Pet Goat. For whatever reason, I believe it was the most intelligent thing he could read. I don't know. But,
so it was such a
penguin secondhand knowledge. Yes, it was. And you felt that if you were in the northern part of the world, especially. And I can tell you the Arctic and the salt mines, very, very interesting for us penguins.
Well, also go in. I didn't know this. $1 billion to broadband plan to connect Canada to the internet, which had we done that
kind of important.
Yeah, but just got to note, had we done it sooner, we might have Chrétien memes. Just saying. And then the parade.
Maybe he wanted to prevent the memes.
Maybe
it's just a matter of, because Chrétien is one of the last prime ministers where we have to go off of myth, off of news reports, off of centralized media. He's one of the last ones.
Yeah. But who knows? There was in 1999, Chrétien supported Canada's involvement in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, bombing Yugoslavia over the issue of Kosovo. Apparently, it was purely to show support to the U.S., but it's also there are certain NATO obligations. I did research on it. It's one of those things where it's like, either you support one side or the other, or you're just anti-war. It's not a cut and dry, we're killing Nazis type situation. It's not a cut and dry one. Because I think we can all get around killing Nazis. I think we can all get behind that.
Maybe the Nazis won't like that, but
they don't matter.
Ooh. Oh.
Anyway, let's get into some fun stuff. So, one of my favorite Chrétien quotes. To be frank, politics is about wanting power, getting it, exercising it, and keeping it. Not wrong.
Nope.
I mean, he's the observant entertainer for a reason. Not wrong. This is unheard of. They escaped injury when an armed man came into 24 Sussex Drive. There's a lot of different stories about it, but the legend is his wife struck the assailant over the head with a miniature Inukshuk. That is the legend. But it also is might have contributed to the Shawinigan handshake, which was somebody I believe threw a pie at him, and he strangled him on live television. And said he was giving him a handshake. By the way, Shawinigan is where Jean Chrétien is from, so that's where it is. He was known as the little guy from Shawinigan.
There are so many layers to this.
He said one politician.
There are so many layers to this.
Of his mouth. The attack I have to mention twice because it's so like, oh my god. But so. I think if you remember, we mentioned him and Bell Palsy when we were talking about Kim Campbell and that particular attack ad. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but he might be the only, if not the most visibly physically disabled prime minister I think we've had.
In terms of visible disabilities, yes, he is by far the most visible one.
Which is pretty neat. So you couldn't deny it. One side of his face was paralyzed. That's why there's layers to he's the one politician who didn't talk out both sides of his mouth, which he said about himself, by the way.
Yes, he did.
He absolutely said that about himself. We're going to get to the elephant in the room in a little bit, but overall, for better or worse, he has been the most entertaining prime minister.
Yeah.
We've got the Shawinigan handshake.
You can hear it in our voices.
Yeah,
we have a pretty high opinion of this guy's entertainment value.
Shawinigan handshake, the pepper spray on the food, the home invasion, the Carol Bennett verbal assault, which we'll get to later, which, you know, completely offside, completely out of line, but holy fuck was it a moment. Chrétien told the press that George W. Bush was a friend and he's not a moron at all, which led to press headlines such as Chrétien denies Bush is a moron. Like, that's straight out of a TV show. Am I wrong? Like, that's totally straight out of a TV show.
Oh my god.
So some stuff about him and his life. So he was the 18th of 19 children, 10 of which survived infancy. Chrétien was asked by Lawrence Martin what his best subject in high school was, and Chrétien said, "It was street fighting that I was best at," which I think says a lot about him. He actually did attend the Liberal convention in Ottawa that chose Lester B. Pearson as the party leader, but Chrétien actually supported Paul Martin Sr. So please note that. We spoke about the Bell's palsy, which left one side of his face partially paralyzed, but he's also deaf in one ear, which I didn't realize because not as visible. The Dalton camp said that Chrétien looked like the driver of a getaway car. When he was at the Treasury Board, he became known as Dr. No, because he would refuse certain requests in a very brisk manner when people were asking for more money for their departments. The elephant in the room, so Michael Chrétien, he was his adopted son. And
daughter?
Yeah.
What the heck is a daughter?
I don't know. From 91 to 92, he was his Michael was charged with kidnapping, rape, and sodomy against a Montreal woman and was convicted. Michael did suffer from fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and had a long history of legal trouble. So there was a lot of that going on. And I will admit, it is difficult to be a parent who wants to support their child improving, but also wanting them to accept responsibility for their actions and, what is it? Restorative justice about those actions as well. So obviously stressful time. Yeah, the protester for the Shawinigan handshake was Bill Clement. And it actually, I was wrong. It happened during a walkabout in Hull, Quebec. The direct quote for pepper spray: "For me, pepper, I put it on my plate." Which is even better than what I said.
Yeah.
It's so great. He, in fact, had a very long leadership struggle with Paul Martin. They were longtime political rivals, but they did work well together. And Chrétien, at the age of 90, is the oldest living former Canadian Prime Minister as of right now. Now then, I've got so many quotes from him. I'm assuming you want me to cherry pick some for you to talk about.
Yeah, please do.
So, a proof is proof. What kind of proof? It's proof. A proof is proof. And when you have good proof, it's because it's proven.
Keep in mind, this man was involved in scandals for a reason.
It's just I'm convinced, and maybe some people will become convinced too, is that he was playing the part of the fool while being knowledgeable the entire time.
Yeah,
a well-informed fool. Here's one. I do think that the Western world is getting too rich in relations to the poor world, and necessarily we're looked upon as being arrogant, self-satisfied, greedy, and with no limits. And the 11th of September is an occasion for me to realize it even more. When you are powerful, like you are, you guys, he's referring to the US, by the way, it's time to be nice. And it is one of the problems. You cannot exercise your powers to the point of humiliation of others. And that is what the Western world, not only the Americans, but the Western world has to realize. So you've got the proof quote, and then you've got something incredibly insightful, and that was actually at a 2002 CBC interview. So not long after September 11th, I want to note.
It was not long after September 11th, and it really speaks to the levity of the September 11th situation where, Chrétien is talking about the situations that led to this, trying to see both sides of the viewpoint, regardless of how tragic one person's view might be.
Yeah, and it was
fantastic.
Yeah, it was tragic, but it's an incredibly insightful quote. And to come after something like proof is proof, the competent, he's playing the part of the fool. He's very competent, very smart. Here's a fun one. Why buy Reaper carbines and nuclear armaments? If this is to be kept at home, a child can play with it.
Yeah.
Insightful and humorous. I don't know what is marijuana. Perhaps I will try it when it will no longer be criminal. I will have my money for my fine and a joint in the other hand. What he said about Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Trudeau valued performance above image. He knew he could give me a shovel if there was a mess to clean up and kept me moving from one mess to another. So again, they weren't friends. They weren't close. But
no.
Pierre Elliott Trudeau knew what Chrétien was capable of and moved him to where he could do what he was capable of. Oh, this is a fun one. Obviously, I would have been happier if Canada had not been conquered in the past by the English. If this part of North America had remained French. But you can't rewrite history.
No.
And I think, again, it's funny, but it's also nuanced. It's like, okay, sure, that'd be great, but that's not what happened. So we've got to move forward and find solutions, you know? You have to look at history as an evolution of society.
Yeah.
A leader has to know how the system functions, not just the system of government, but the whole social and economic system, including business, the unions, and universities.
Yep.
If military action in Iraq is launched without a new UN resolution, Canada will not participate, which was watershed moment for Canada, by the way. Big thing.
It was huge.
There's no such thing as a genius in politics, or at least I have never met one. There are only human beings, some better than others, who rise or fall on the challenges they meet. There's so many more other quotes, but again, you're seeing this, like, the ridiculous contrasted with the introspective. Yeah. Like, these are very, very clear quotes, and also respect and nuance and humor as well. It's quite interesting. And one more quote. Well, two more, actually. I don't feel the need to have a lot of yes-mans standing around me. As Mitchell Sharp once put it, the bigger the staff, the smaller the minister. I learned that business is business and politics is politics. The proof is how few important businessmen have made good politicians. They think that they are very smart about everything because they have made millions of dollars by digging a hole in the ground and finding oil. But the talent and luck needed to become rich are not the same as the talent and luck needed to succeed on Parliament Hill. So it's really neat to see all of these things. It's really neat. Now then.
Yeah.
Sexy Moose.
Sexy Moose!
Sexy Moose, which means it's CV time. So, we'll see if I can find any facts that little Crabsworth didn't know about already. So, he was a law graduate from University Laval. And he became active in the Young Liberals. He actually became president because no one else wanted the job and they were too frightened to antagonize Union Nationale. So he has this history of, screw it, I'm taking it on now. He did practice law at a Shawinigan law firm. He was first elected to the House of Commons in 1963. Now, I will say that he did come from poverty. His brother got a real leg up with some scholarships from Catholic schools, I believe, and that in turn helped the younger siblings gain better education and better career opportunities. So he did actually come from an impoverished family. He was on the Finance Committee. He served as parliamentary secretary to Prime Minister Lester B. Pearson. He served as secretary to the Minister of Finance, Mitchell Sharp.
Yes, he did.
Sharp basically became Chrétien's mentor. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I'm like choking on my own words.
Chrétien's got you all choked up.
I know. Again, the Vive le Québec Libre, comparing the Quiet Revolution to the liberation of France from the Nazis. Chrétien was actually in cabinet and was part of people demanding that the French president leave. Because again, not the same thing. Not the same thing at all. Like, not the same thing. He was a minister without a portfolio. He became Minister of National Revenue. He was Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development. That's where the white paper happened under Pierre Trudeau, which actually galvanized the the Indigenous people of the country in protesting it. And the white paper went away, and then we had the addition of them into the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Because again, we are a nation of nations, y'all.
Yeah.
So, President of the Treasury Board, Minister of Finance, he was actually big on imposing tariffs on clothing made abroad to encourage more production within Canada. And actually having the government fund the development of the Challenger aircraft. There was Chrétien actually intervened in 1971 on the side of the Cree people, which was during the James Bay project to develop hydroelectrical dams on rivers that were flowing into James Bay. So he actually told the Bourassa government they could go to hell because they did not have the right to build on or flood the land claimed by the Cree. And he actually hired lawyers to argue for the Cree in the courts. So that was pretty cool. During the October crisis of 97, Chrétien told Trudeau to act now and explain later, because Trudeau was hesitant to enact the War Measures Act. But it was, again, we said there were possible international pressures. There were the fears that we would have an IRA situation on our hands. So he was the Minister of Justice. He actually delivered during the Quebec referendum. He would deliver an average of 6 or 7 speeches a day during that period. Once again, I said that Trudeau valued Chrétien, but there was a certain gulf. We've got very intellectual Trudeau and a decidedly non-intellectual Chrétien, but they recognized the capabilities of each other. I would say that some of the quotes that we just had from Chrétien, quite insightful and intellectual, I would say.
Yes.
But I don't know the definitions that they're using for this. He was the nominal spokesperson for the federal government during the Quebec referendum. There's a whole thing on Section 33 of the Charter about him and how it came to be that he was like, Trudeau, I know you don't want it, but what's more important to you?
Yep.
You got to make the hard choices. He was Minister of Energy. In 1984, he actually lost leadership to Turner. Chrétien actually ran as a defender of the Trudeau era, promising to continue all of Trudeau's policies, whereas Turner promised a break from it. So he would position himself as the folksy leftist populist person and would mock Turner as a right-wing Bay Street snob who was out of touch with ordinary people. He did not pull punches.
No.
He was Deputy Prime Minister and Secretary for State External Affairs. In 1985, he actually published a book, Straight from the Heart, and it was an instant bestseller recounting his early life in Shawinigan and also his time in the House of Commons. He resigned in 86, along with Special Executive Assistant Jean Carl. And then he was on the boards of several corporations, including the Power Corporation of Canada, the Toronto Dominion Bank, and the Brick Warehouse Corporation. Then the leadership review happened, and Chrétien attempted to organize against Turner. Chrétien actually used Turner's penchant for heavy drinking to spread rumors that Turner was an alcoholic, who was simply too drunk most of the time to lead the Liberals effectively. So there was a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff going on. He was never afraid to get his hands dirty. Let me put it that way. 1990 was when he declared he would run to be leader. And it was basically going to be remembered as the Chrétien era. And Chrétien's key campaign man, and you need to remember this name, was Jim Karigananzis. Oh, I'm butchering his name and I apologize. And what Jim did was he specialized in signing up immigrants to serve as delegates for Chrétien, and he signed up 9,500 people. So he won party leadership over Paul Martin, obviously became leader of the official opposition. He had a chance to make a very strong impression on the public. So he went on the offensive with attacking Mulroney. And then he came into power, and he had his solution for the recession was to embrace globalization as a cure for the recession of the early 90s, coupled with allowing for a low Canadian dollar. And the reason why that was clever is the lower Canadian dollar means that corporations move their manufacturing from the US into Canada.
Yep.
So that's why that was clever. The Liberal platform was released in the quote-unquote Red Book, and Paul Martin was the person who led the writing of the Red Book. And Paul Martin, this is my favorite quote from him, and I'm not afraid to use it now. He said, "Don't tell me about the Red Book. I wrote the damn thing, and I know it's a lot of crap." So just wonderful, wonderful quote there. So 93, Chrétien led the Liberals to a strong majority government, and then led the government in 2 additional majorities in 97 and 2000. He officially
did.
And we mentioned everything that he did there. He officially resigned in November 12th, 2003 as party leader. He resigned as prime minister on December 12th, so a month later. And then he joined a law firm as counsel. He testified in the Gomery Commission regarding the sponsorship scandal in February 2005. His responsibility for the sponsorship scandal, it was ultimately ruled that he was not responsible for the awarding of advertising contracts in Quebec, where the millions were stolen. So that was the ultimate ruling there. 2007, he published a book called A Passion for Politics, as well as there was a republish in Straight from the Heart. So he was doing a lot of touring at that time, but he had to stop because he had a quadruple heart bypass surgery, which is just nuts there.
For those of you who don't know, a quadruple bypass surgery is the same as what Homer Simpson had to his heart, so...
Yeah, it's big surgery.
Yeah.
Then November, so remember, quadruple heart bypass surgery, 2007. 2008, Chrétien and former NDP leader Ed Broadbent came out of retirement to negotiate a formal coalition agreement between the Liberals, the NDP, and the Bloc Québécois. This was because Harper kept calling and was granted prorogues of Parliament. And guess what he did? He did it again to prevent that coalition from happening. So,
yep.
But that's wild. Quadruple heart bypass surgery. Then he's doing that. 2010, he had emergency surgery for a 3-centimeter wide subdural hematoma that was pushing 1.5 centimeters into his brain.
Yeah.
And he keeps on kicking. He is a member of the foundation of Currach's Honor Committee, a member of Club de Madrid, honorary member of the International Raoul Wallenberg Foundation. He was named in the Paradise Papers. I will note it is not uncommon for people who are in the public eye to have shell corporations to do personal buying and expenditures because they don't want to be in the public eye. For example, Emma Watson was named in those papers, and it was because she wanted to privately buy a house, which is why she used that method. So there's multiple reasons for people being in those Paradise Papers. We would have to go through a fine-tooth comb to figure it out. Neither of us are forensics accountants or economists, so couldn't tell you. We wouldn't be very good at going through it. He was appointed Order of Canada. He was given the Order of Merit by Queen Elizabeth II. He also got the insignia of the Order from the Queen. He was openly critical of the Harper government.
Yes,
So
he was.
In 2015, he actually published an open letter to Canadian voters in multiple newspapers where he criticized Harper's response to the European migrant crisis, stating that Harper has turned Canada into a cold-hearted nation and has shamed Canada. He went on to say, "I am sad to see that in fewer than 10 years, the Harper government has tarnished almost 60 years of Canada's reputation as a builder of peace and progress." In 2021, Chrétien faced controversy during a promotional press interview for his recent book publication, in which he denied having knowledge of the ongoing abuse happening to Indigenous children in residential schools when he was the Indian Affairs minister. He also did compare his own boarding school experience to the residential school experience. Not the same thing. I want to say it is not the same thing. However, that comparison does lay credence to why people didn't necessarily take it seriously, because guess what? Corporal punishment in schools, that was common. That was common. Yep. It was common to, like, you want your kids to have a good education, you send them to boarding school, and you don't see them except for a few times in the year. Corporal punishment was common. There's also, when I speak to older people, there's this sort of notion of like, well, the residential school kids got to like dream of going home to a loving family. I was getting beaten up at the Catholic school, and then I go home and get beaten up by my own parents. So it's very, when you make those conversations personal, it's very charged. But I think the big difference that we have to recognize is the parents didn't choose to send their kids there. The kids didn't choose to go there. They were forced to go there. They had no choice. So while I recognize that it was misguided, I wanted to use this as a point to point out that there are a lot of people who, when they try to compare on the personal level, they're missing that big point of nobody wanted to be or send their kids to the residential schools. And then finally, in Policy Opinions, a historian and author, Bob Palmodin, pointed out that after demonizing Chrétien, Quebec nationalists could not recognize themselves to the reality that he gave their province new tools to protect the French language and culture. Canada had not been as united in the previous 50 years as when Chrétien left office. Economists were left to wonder how Chrétien turned around the national finances without triggering a recession. Canadians said in a survey that staying out of the Iraq War was the country's greatest foreign policy achievement. University presidents still marvel at how Chrétien rebuilt Canada's intellectual infrastructure during a brain drain into a brain gain, which I thought was the best summation. Anything surprising in there for you?
No, nothing really. With Jean Chrétien, a lot of it is what you see is what you get.
Yes.
He's very transparent. Whether you like the man or you don't, it's really irrelevant. As to whether or not you knew where he stood on all issues, because he would tell you.
Yeah.
Flat out. Any sort of rumors that he was, say, being bought off or other things like that, shrugged off of him because, number one, he's so entertaining, and number two, again, what you saw is what you got with Chrétien.
Yeah.
He was also very, very blunt when speaking to media, too.
Yeah.
Which I don't think we get a lot of credit for. He's very intellectually blunt, but he's blunt.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes things a lot easier to understand if you are in the media for Jean Chrétien. Yeah.
Now, what I will note is Kim Campbell got criticized for being blunt in the media. Chrétien did not get criticized for that. So, interesting disparity, something to think about.
Hey, this is Trapdoor Crabsworth for deathpixie. If you liked our content, please like this video and subscribe. And if you want to see more, just check out our links in the description. Do it. Do it or Miri will kill you.